Forbes Books presents The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard Szatvanyi, highlighting the pioneers that reimagined possibilities and reimagined businesses. This week, Jerry and I are happy to welcome Brian Evergreen to The Great Digital Transformation. Brian is an author and advisor on AI and digital transformation. He's worked with Fortune 500 companies to develop impact AI strategies, and as the founder of the Profitable Good Company, Brian now partners with leaders to create a more human-centered approach to AI. He's the author of the new book, Autonomous Transformation, Creating a More Human Future in the Era of Artificial Intelligence, what he calls a blueprint for integrating AI to uplift people. Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
And so you have an AI book, and we all know that AI is having a moment. But to write a book that comes out in the fall of 23, you had to have been thinking about this before it hit the mainstream back in November of 22. So tell us about the inspiration for this book and why now?
So I wrote a post in 2020, actually, that I found January 2020 before the pandemic, where I said this year my goal is to dive into creating a more human future in the era of AI. And I want to connect with anyone and everyone that is interested in talking about that. And so I've been thinking about this for a while. And ever since I really took on the role as the AI strategy lead for Microsoft US and realized that a lot of executives were not only interested in talking about the economic potential of AI, but also what are the risks and opportunities, and how is this going to impact society and impact the communities that we work in and the people that work within our organizations. And so I've been thinking about this for quite a while and signed the book agreement last April before DALL-E 2 was announced or ChatGPT or any of that. And all in all, in terms of from start to finish, it was about a year of writing.
Wow. And do you feel like as you were writing and then all of a sudden, the DALL-E and ChatGPT, you're like, oh no, please slow down because my book's just not ready yet?
I didn't actually. I felt like, if anything, one of the chapters I'd written about, I wrote about epistemology in the age of AI, I think I called it. And this idea of how do you know that you know what you know when there's all this misinformation and all this hype and so many people that there's so much economic incentive to try to position yourself as an expert. And then ChatGPT came out and that increased tenfold or maybe 100-fold of more and more people trying to position themselves as AI experts. And if anything, it was a good test for whether or not the tools that I'd laid out would work effectively in this new era. And fortunately, I feel like they stood up to it.
Awesome. And Jerry, a running joke on the podcast when it comes to AI is like, man, this stuff's been around for a long time. It's just that now more and more people know about it. Brian had this revelation in 2020, but when did you realize, Jerry, that this was not just going to be a passing fad like the metaverse? When did you realize that you knew that this was here to stay and this was not just going to be something that's on and gone?
Well, my company has been working on AI since 5 years now. We've been investing and learning and exploring ways to make this thing happen. And really, 2 years ago, we started building a product that would enable my people to be more productive so that the AI assists in the way they deliver their work. And now when ChatGPT came out, was like a perfect storm because we were there already. We actually had something to show. We have a live demo. We have people using it. And like when you compare it, people who are using it versus people who are not using it, you can see productivity increases at an order of 20-30%, which is not a rounding error. It's not trivial. And I was, right from the beginning, I was thinking that this is going to really disrupt our industry. It's been a long time coming. People have been discussing about this for quite some time, but now it's all coming together. Now, the challenge is going to be to kind of separate the day from the night and understanding who is who in this space and who is bullshitting you and who's actually and understand something about the space. That's going to be the big challenge, at least for 1 or 2 more years, because a lot of noise.
I completely agree. Well, first of all, I wanted to add something. Joe, you'd mentioned I've been thinking about this since 2020. That's when I started thinking about writing a book to some degree. And But I'd say that in terms of when I realized AI was going to be sort of a thing was before it was sort of rebranded to AI in the broad discourse when it was just called advanced analytics. In 2014, I worked on an initiative for Microsoft when I was at Accenture. Microsoft was a client. And I had this overwhelming sense when I was doing the strategy work and digging into the Gartner and Forrester and IDC reports and seeing, oh, there's going to be this huge talent gap between data scientists and the demand. And we're seeing that today, right? There's actually only, according to Gartner data, 10,000 or so data scientists who can actually build a full AI solution from start to finish. And so if each of the Fortune 500 hired 20 data scientists, now there's no more data scientists for the rest of the world. And so it has been a challenge, and it's only grown this year. In terms of navigating, who to trust and understanding and thinking through that, I think I agree completely with Jerry's comment that that's something that is going to be interesting to see. I actually made a joke about that show where there was the guy that cheated on his girlfriend, and it was a very public.
Oh, Vanderpump Rules, yeah.
Yes, Thank you. Yes, Vanderpump Rules, and I made a meme where it shows that guy and the tagline underneath it says, "I can't believe you tried to sell me, an AI solution that you yourself didn't understand." And the guy's like, "It was only one time," right? And so I think that we're going to see a lot of that. I think that there's a lot of advisors right now who are quickly trying to pivot to being an expert on something that you can't just read a few online PDFs or watch a few videos and suddenly understand. Not to say that it's completely insurmountable. It shouldn't be an ivory tower either. But I do think that there unfortunately is a temptation, and I've seen a proliferation of people that have positioned themselves as if they're experts in something that they're not. And I think that the market will, the same way that Google results, right? When you first search something now, the first few things are going to be ads. So you scroll past them to get to the real content. I think the same thing's going to happen in the AI expert space.
The irony is that ChatGPT will actually make things worse. It's so good in providing you the right answers and really making you look like you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because Brian, I would love to get I don't know if you're able to even talk about this, but you worked on AI at Microsoft, but famously Microsoft got into bed with the folks at OpenAI to launch their Bing AI. More to my curiosity, if they've been working on AI, why was it important for them to start this relationship with OpenAI, or just not even start a relationship, but like publicly state that, hey, we're a team on this AI thing?
That's a good question. I think that Microsoft has always had an ecosystem approach. And so if you think about it, you can't specialize in everything. And it's better, especially for Microsoft as a platform provider, if they can partner with the organizations that are leading in specialization around something like chatbots. If you think about in 2018, when they're in the room discussing, and I'm not saying this from having privy to it as much as just postulating, right? You imagine being in that room and discussing with these people that are going to leverage this technology to do something really significant when it comes to chat or large language models. Why double the efforts? Why not, for Microsoft as the host of Azure and where that's one of their main flywheels, why not pick the clear winners in that space and in the 10 other or 20, 50 other spaces where it seems like there's the right experts that are going to really dive into a specialization, and then have Microsoft be the underlying platform and then tie that into everything else. That's just a doubling or tripling of efforts.
It's amazing how swift that deal went down, because all of a sudden everyone's talking about ChatGPT, and then a week later there's this press release about the Bing AI. I'm like, well, wait a minute, how did that? I mean, you were inside there. Is that something normal that Microsoft moves so quick to not only to create a collaboration but announce it to the world? I mean, that seemed very fast as an outsider.
I would say that there was
they were working on it.
Yeah.
In quite some time.
Thanks, Jerry. Yes. Yes. I would say that there was already more than enough signal. I had some colleagues that had, and this is publicly known, I had some colleagues who had inside, they had access to GPT-4 well before ChatGPT came out or GPT-4 came out publicly. So, and so I think that, those developments and investments were taking place, and that it was sort of a staggering of announcements, more so than, December ChatGPT is announced, and then in 1 month Microsoft made all of those advancements. That's not exactly how it took place.
Okay. Good to know. Thanks for that, Brian. Because I was always wondering, because, a big company like that, I can only imagine the layers and layers of people that have to be involved in a decision like that. So, as Jerry said, they're working on it. There's some back channel conversations going on there.
And I will say that during the COVID, because I was there when COVID, first sort of broke out, right? The pandemic broke out. And I will say that there were a lot of areas where Microsoft was able to move extremely quickly to try to respond to the need of customers around the world. And so it's not to say that they can't move that quickly, but I think in this case, there wasn't a need to, because they made that significant investment. They knew, they had the signal, they knew when it was time to start making their own developments alongside and leveraging these technologies. And they'd been doing that even since before GPT-4, right? It's just this sort of all worked out quite well in tandem in the market earlier this year and late last year.
Brian, in your book, you're talking about a blueprint in integrating the AI with people. What I found, ironically, is that there is a lot of resistance from people to actually use AI to make their lives better, to make their lives easier. There is a lot of resistance. I would like to hear your comments on how did you see that people would adopt and would run with it?
I like that question. And what I'd say is that I think it, in a lot of ways, comes down to rituals for us as people, and how we define the good life and what we want the human experience to be. And so I think if you look at it from a numbers perspective, if you say, well, this AI is going to make you more productive, the answer should be an obvious yes. But if that productivity means that part of like, for instance, you think about a restaurant and you say, okay, I did a poll on this with some leaders, and it was interesting. I'm guessing, actually, I'll ask you guys just for fun. So if you could choose between a restaurant that was, let's say the food tastes exactly the same, but you're either having all robots. You've got a robot server, you've got a robot cooking the food, and a robot cleaning the dishes, right? Let's just break it down to those, overly simplified buckets. That's one option, all robots. Another option, all humans. Something in the middle might be, okay, I have a human server, and then behind the scenes, it's all robots. And then something kind of in between, a gradient of it, is human server, human chef, and then a robot cleans the dishes, let's say. So I'd be curious, if you had to pick, and this is your family outing, like once a week you're going to this restaurant for dinner, not just like a novel one-time experience. This is your haunt, your local haunt, so to speak. Which of those would you pick? Let's say the food tastes exactly the same.
I would definitely not go for a restaurant where it's like 100% robots, because there is no way you can escalate if something goes wrong. And I would really go to a place where uses this like well-balanced kind of a setup with people in the driver's seat, managing it, supervising everything, and making sure that the robots are there just to provide the smooth kind of experience for the customer, like prompt delivery, really fast cooking or whatever, and just the humans are there to orchestrate everything and making sure that things are happening like really well. So that's the place that I would go to. I would, because it's I've seen it. I've seen some automation even in the kitchen. We've been working on some projects on automating the restaurant experience. So that definitely you can provide a better customer experience. But I don't see this in a world where you don't have the humans involved. I would definitely not like that.
I feel exactly the same way. If I imagine a world where everything you're interacting with, other than someone you happen to brush alongside as you wait in line or something, everything else is machines, that doesn't sound like a very human. It sounds like a cold, kind of lonely world. And so I think that's one reason that we've struggled to adopt, when if you zoom back out to kind of the enterprise level, I think that we have sometimes black and white thinking, where it's either that you're going to automate completely and go full, robot, for lack of a better phrase, or you're going to have this be intensely manual, and, that way at least you're preserving the human element. And I think that it takes a high degree of strategy and forethought to put together a plan to say, okay, these are the experiences where interacting with our brand and our company, where it matters that that's a human experience, that that's personal, that there's a connection being made. And these are all the things where it doesn't, let's say, or maybe it's not an interaction with our brand. Maybe it's just something behind the scenes, like dishes being washed in the kitchen of a restaurant. I don't think that I wouldn't even likely know unless they advertised it. And two, I wouldn't care, because that, to me, that's, as long as I'm enjoying my experience with the server and interacting with people, like we go to a local Italian spot every Thursday, and it's family owned, and it's, been in that family for decades, and right. And so that story, that human experience of going and seeing those other people, and the fact that they know my name and I know their name is part of the experience. And so if you generalize that across when you're calling into your local credit union, and for me, at least, they switch back from an IVR that is full robotics to, clicking and doing a digital menu to, maybe you wait a minute or two, but then you get on with someone that says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so from one city over from where you are." And they are able to, provide that human experience there on that phone call, and then enable those agents with tools so they can be more effective, but preserving kind of that human experience when it comes to interacting with customers. And when I think, in terms of the book, I think that it can be tempting in the face of automation with all these tools to think, how can I use this to remove the human element from my organization so that therefore I can reduce cost? And I would argue that that is actually long-term, not an economically viable strategy or plan. Rather, to say, how can I preserve the human, or even amplify the human element of working or, having an experience with my company, but then empower those humans to be more effective and to do better to and for our customers or our clients with these digital tools. And so that would be the lens of that I think is a long-term, thinking more about expansion with these sorts of tools, how to add to your top line, as opposed to driving cost out of your bottom line by removing the human element from your organization. I think there will be organizations that do that, and then either they'll make the market rebound from the negative reaction that they'll see, and recover, or I think there might be some that won't recover altogether, and there'll be some household names that we're familiar with today that will go the way of Blockbuster because they went too full in the automation direction.
Without getting too far ahead, the book is called Autonomous Transformation. How would you define that? What are characteristics of autonomous transformation?
So autonomy is the right or power of self-governing. And then transformation means to change the nature or structure of something, to transform it. And so if you combine those and you say, okay, we're in moving from an analog or digital paradigm, we're moving toward an autonomous where a machine can self-govern. In other words, make a decision on its own without a human in the loop. And then by in so doing, and in applying that kind of technology, you're transforming a market offering or some kind of value that you bring to the world. I'm glad you asked this question, because a lot of times I think people think digital transformation would cover that, right? It's become this sort of ever-growing blanket that covers anything and everything that plugs into a wall these days. And but the issue is that there's a lot of things that are called digital transformation where it's not actually transformative. So the process is exactly the same, but now it's digital. And so for that one, I thought, okay, let me try to start with the definition and work backwards to come up with the right term. And what I came up with is reformation. So the definition of reformation is to vastly improve something without changing the nature or structure of it. And so if you think about, if you have a process and you're 6 times more efficient because it went from analog to digital, that would be an example of what I've termed in the book digital reformation. Whereas digital transformation would be something like, Uber, where you're creating a whole new gig economy that didn't exist before, or Netflix that is disrupting and changing the way that we experience, and all these new business models coming out of how we think about entertainment. Those would be transformative. But if you have a company that's doing the same thing and is delivering the same value to the market, but now it's more efficient, that's still valuable work. It's just not transformative. So I think it's important to add a little bit more clarity, to the lexicon.
What you call reformation, I call digitization, because I've seen it a lot. People just wanting to just transfer their processes from let's say, paper-based process into a digitized process. But if you don't transform anything, the steps are still the same. You become a little bit more efficient, but it's the same process. You don't transform anything. It's more, I call it, you digitized it instead of having a digital transformation. But I guess reformation is kind of a wider term. It doesn't necessarily have to be done with digital technology. It can be some other type of technology that enables you to become faster in your process.
I agree. And I think that there's, like I mentioned with that IVR example of calling in and having a fully automated, no impossible to reach a human experience with customer care versus being able to, the first person who answers the phone is a person and not a machine. I consider that's an analog transformation, right? Where somebody went in on digital and they tried something, and then their clients are leaving, or their customers are changing over to a competitor, and they're reacting by saying, okay, actually we need to peel this back. And I think we've seen some of that in the sort of, since digital transformation was coined in 2011, but I think we're going to see more of it now that there's so many more ways that you can try to automate or try to digitize the business that you, or the value that you bring to the market. And so I think that people will be experimenting more, and that there'll be more opportunities for them to say, whoops, okay, let's go backwards, because turns out that something that we thought wasn't that important of a connection point actually made a big difference to our customers. So we're gonna shift that back.
And for tech entrepreneurs listening to this podcast, Brian, it's all about what's the ROI. So how do we measure the impact and success of these autonomous transformation projects that you talk about in the book, and hopefully to see forward in the future?
For tech entrepreneurs specifically, what I'd say is that it's an interesting time to be an entrepreneur, because unlike maybe more than any time in the past, we now have a situation where there's such a strong proliferation of ecosystems already at play that if you show up just trying to compete on your own today, like look at OpenAI, right? They didn't just compete on their own. They partnered with Microsoft, and we've seen how that's worked out for them. If you try to show up on your own today, I liken it kind of like to showing up to a basketball tournament that you think is a one-on-one tournament, and you lace up and let's say it's Michael Jordan, even you could be the best in the market, right? And you show up and you lace up and you play your pump up song. For me, that was Eminem. Lose yourself,
of course,
right?
Yes,
yeah,
obviously,
of course, probably,
yes.
yeah, exactly. So, but right, you run out onto the court and you realize, oh no, they have 5 people on their team and it's me. And even if that was Michael Jordan, to me, still the greatest NBA player of all time. I know that's controversial, but that's how I feel, and I'm not going to apologize. And so right, but he would still lose to a 5-player team. And so I think it's the same thing now in the tech space, where you could have an incredible offering, but if you need to think about the ecosystem. And that's, again, another example of sort of that human element, right? Where you can't just look at it purely based on technical terms. You can achieve something absolutely extraordinary from a technology perspective, but it also has to include how does this fit into the market today? And so that's probably one of the most, I guess, pertinent things I would share with technology sort of startup leaders in this space. I'd say in terms of autonomous transformation more broadly, what I'd say is that it's easy for us as enterprise leaders or as any kind of business leader to start with saying, wow, okay, there's this new technology. What am I going to do with it? And I think there's a little bit of that in the way you phrased the question, Joe, of like, okay, how do you do this in this era of autonomous transformation? And I'd say what I usually recommend is saying, forget about the technologies for a minute. Set that aside. It's okay. It'll still be there in an hour after we're done with this conversation or whatever, right? And start with saying, okay, what is the future of my market or my industry? If I could achieve, like, for instance, if you're a utility company, imagine if a new island arose from the Pacific and you were going to set a new grid. What would that grid look like? Instead of thinking, how do I improve the grid I have now? Because there's inherently so many limitations to that. Starting with what would the best possible grid with all the technological capabilities we have today, what would that be? And also the fundamental question, even like we're seeing now of, okay, 17 of the 50 states in the US are no longer regulated. So if we're moving toward a self-generation future, then okay, what does that look like? What would it look like to be the market leader in that space? and work backwards and say, okay, we're going to invest in developing self-generation options that we're going to test out in those 17 states as well as in developing countries. And that way we're positioned that if it continues to go down that path, even if not, we could probably have a profitable business. But if so, then we're positioned to be the leader in that space. And so I'd say, and that you're not going to get to those kinds of strategies or vision for the future of your organization if you start with, okay, ChatGPT, where can I fit this inside of my company? Instead, starting with what is the future of the market that I serve, the way that people want to experience value coming out of our brand and companies like us, and when you work backwards from there, ChatGPT or a large language model, or they may play a role in that. It may also be, like I mentioned, that you actually need to abandon some of the automation that you've done and go for a more analog path for, let's say, your employee experience or something to do with your customer experience. So that's probably the biggest thing I'd say, is starting with that, anchoring on a vision, because there's so many hows that you can start with. If you start with how or even what with the technologies, that you could end up distracting yourself, and you could be making lots of logical, smart investments that prove ROI along the way, or that demonstrate strong ROI. Meanwhile, like Blockbuster, you could be doing amazing work in 2006 before Netflix has introduced streaming. You could be doing heat maps about the best traffic flow, and you can come with the best possible strategic agreements with local city organizations to perfectly place every single one of your stores. And then when Netflix introduces streaming, all that smart, logical work that you did will end up being for naught in the long run. So that's kind of the general guidance I'd say, is to start with, what is that future of the market, or what future would we want to create? If we cast forward and we say the future of this industry should be like this, regardless of whether it's possible or who's on the way to that, this is what it should look like. Okay, well, how do we work backwards? How can we create that, especially if you're a market leader?
Brian, you mentioned something about startups and technology and whatever. I'm a little bit worried about this. In 2-3 years from now, if you're a startup that cannot afford to pay for some AI assistants, some AI bots, you won't be able to start. And that will make it prohibitive for startups to actually start. What's your take on this?
That's a great question. I've thought about this a bit as well, because I do think that the environment, the context in which startups can thrive is one of the biggest contributors to strong GDP, right? And so I think that what I would say is that the nature of ideas right now, it's been, can we create a sort of technical prototype, and then can we scale that and get some initial customers, and then hopefully get Y Combinator, get someone to either invest in us or buy us, right? Depending on the trajectory that we feel like we're on and our risk profile and all of that. And what I'd say is that I don't know that that's going to change so much. I think that startups will need to be a little bit more strategic, in the sense of it will need to be a combination not only of business model and technology. Like if you started you think about it, Facebook was founded, it was launched, I think, in 2004 or 5. And that wasn't that long ago when you think about it. But if you said, I'm going to launch a new social media startup today, well, the market's already, look at Meta's Threads and, sort of what we're seeing there and in terms of the market reaction. I'd say that it's going to be similar, probably, I think, in the AI space, or in, like you mentioned, Jerry, across pretty much any sector. If you're doing a startup that doesn't have some kind of AI capability, I think it's sad to me, because it shouldn't be about the marketing of being able to claim that you have AI. It should be that you're creating something truly differentiated. And to your point, that will require investment. And but I think that what I would consider is, if you can create a proof of concept where you can demonstrate the technical capability, you can still use that to get funding. So you might not need to, for instance, like the amount of computational costs for large language models is enormous. We know that. But if you're saying, okay, I'm going to use reinforcement learning, there's still some cost involved there, but there's other types of AI methods and methodologies that if you have the right technical team, you can still develop enough of a prototype to prove out that, yes, this concept is possible, and this is why we think the market will react positively to it. And you might have a little bit more of a design of experiments, maybe in collaboration with investors than we've been seeing up till now. But my hope is that it won't be prohibitive.
Well, you see what NVIDIA did just 1 or 2 months ago. They invested in a company, and practically their investment was to just give the chips for the AI work. And in this kind of a situation, like, the bar is raised really high. Like, if you want to start and you need chips in the amount of $100 million, that's going to be a very tough start. And I'm a little bit worried that even if you bring a lot of democratization of AIs and a lot of techniques of let's not build a new AI, but let's fine tune an existing one and make it be more specific for a specific activity. There is still kind of the entry point becomes a little bit more expensive than otherwise. So I'm a little bit worried. I'm a little bit worried about where this is going to take the entire space, the entire industry.
Yeah, and we should get to Brian, we should get into the human of it all, because the subtitle of your book is Creating a More Human Future, and this sort of ties into what we've been discussing. Let's not forget about us, because, we could build all these LLMs and they're just going to get more powerful, but let's talk about how humans fit into this future, which you obviously felt strong enough to make it as part of the subtitle of your book. So let's get into us little old humans here in the world of AI.
That's a great question. I would say that the element, Creating a More Human Future portion of the book, right, which is the thread throughout all of it, that stemmed from the questions that I was asking. Like I mentioned, that question in 2020 of what does it look like to create a more human future in the face of all this technological change? And I had initially thought that those were two separate considerations, and that you could hopefully point the influence and the market impact of these technologies as you're harnessing the economic potential, point that toward a more human future. That was my initial hypothesis. As I dug into the research and writing of the book and the interviews that I held, what I was sort of delighted to find out was that we've actually reached a point in our sort of trajectory in, I guess, business, for lack of a better phrase. It's quickly becoming unprofitable to treat your organization like it's a large mechanical machine and your people like they're cogs in the machine. I recently wrote an article that I'm not sure when this podcast is coming out, so I don't know if it'll be out yet, but called Treating People Like Cogs in the Machine has finally met its match. And basically, dehumanizing work used to be profitable, and treating people like cogs in a machine was profitable. And so you basically was up to individual integrity to decide to not lead in that way. And there was some economic benefit, but not like there will be in the future. I think we've already started to reach a point. You look at the Steve Ballmer era of Microsoft, which is sort of a case study on leading in an organization like it's a large mechanical machine and the people in it are cogs, versus Satya Nadella's era so far, right? From February 2014 to today. His example, even though, you could look at any leader and poke holes and say, well, wait a minute, we just had these layoffs or whatever. But all in all, the net leadership approach that Satya has taken is, I would call, a social system. He's used the organization like a social system, not like a big machine. And he, at the time that he entered the office of the chief executive, he said, we need a new technology strategy, a new business strategy, and a new people strategy. And so instead of seeing that as just some fluffy thing on the side that HR was going to take care of, he said, we need to focus on culture, right? And that's, and today, from an economic perspective, the stock, as of, the last time I checked, which was, I think, yesterday or the day before, the stock price was trading at 9 times what it was trading at when he entered the executive office. And so I think and that's just one example, there's quite a few more, but it's quickly becoming unprofitable to dehumanize work and to prioritize machines over humans. And so I think that's the element that I see in Creating a More Human Future, is that it's not just about pointing whatever you have at a more human future. It's most AI initiatives that fail end up failing because of some kind of social problem inside of the organization, not a technical problem. I'd be curious, Jerry, if you agree. But that's another example where by creating a more human future now within your organization, you'll actually get more benefit out of the technologies.
I think this is also, I mean, we are a creation of Workforce 4.0. That's the title of my new book that's going to come out in October. It's like the next industrial revolution. And we've never been this kind of an organization where we created like a machine, whatever. Someone is just a cog in the machine. It's like a living organism, living and growing and adapting and learning and an organism that is able to adjust. It's very much not aligned with the ways that these things used to be. And if we can broaden a little bit the scope, because what you are talking here about is like the impact inside the enterprise, but like there is an impact in the society as well, because you create much more efficient companies, and then there will be some substitution of jobs. There will be some areas where and enterprises will become very efficient, and you're gonna see more and more profits, and you're gonna see some monopolies in some areas. Do you see a future where we're gonna tax AIs the same as we tax people because they generate income?
I think that's a little speculative, and I don't know that I disagree with you yet, but I haven't thought as much about taxing AI the way we tax people. But I will say that I agree completely with what you said about how it doesn't just matter. It's not just important how you treat the people inside of your organization. It's also important how you treat your community that you're operating in, or communities and the market. And we're seeing a spot now where if you make a misstep in how you treat your people, well, 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, if you're, ruling, with an iron fist and you're being an absolute jerk to your employees, well, you might be one of the only places they can work in town, or they might not have anyone else in their network that could get them to the type of job that they have now. So they're just going to stomach it. And now, especially in the pandemic, I think we've seen with people having so much more access and spending so much more time online, they've gotten an insight into and with things like Glassdoor and LinkedIn, we see all the job opportunities that are out there. So many free educational resources. The world is now at your fingertips, where you can get a job, anywhere around the world for free in a lot of cases, access all the educational resources and materials you would need to learn what you would need to do for that, to get that job. And so I think that now we're seeing where the way that you treat your organization internally, but also the net societal impact of what you're doing in terms of the way that you make your product. If there's a negative sustainability impact from a sustainability perspective, the data scientists, like we mentioned at the beginning of this discussion, there's only 10,000 of them in the world. That means that they're on the upside of a supply shortage, right? And so they've got a line waiting out the door of other high-paying opportunities that the moment that they're either not proud of the work they're doing or don't feel connected to the meaning of it, or think it's going to fail for some social reason or otherwise, they can leap to another a new job opportunity that's waiting for them. And so I think that, and at the same time, you also have consumers and investors and partners all demanding more of and more visibility and more transparency in how things are being made and where they're being sourced from and what the net societal and global impact of these initiatives are, not just the cost and the value of a given product that's being generated, but every piece of it. And a misstep in any direction at best could lead to people quitting, and at worst can lead to strikes like we're seeing in Hollywood or boycotts from consumers.
But this Hollywood example is quite good, because it's like AI will be very transformative for their jobs. And I think there needs to be a bigger conversation about how AI will transform the society. Like because we are living still in a world where we don't have enough money to take care of basic needs, such as basic healthcare, basic education, basic minimal stuff. Like these basic needs, we are still discussing about this. How about this technology comes in? Maybe it will enable us to kind of make sure that this basic layer is taken care of, and then we compete from that onward, because it's we are no longer with this. We are no longer going to live in the same paradigm as we lived 10 years ago, and maybe it will enable humankind to actually imagine living and functioning in a very different way than even 10 years ago. That's what I'm hoping for, but we as a humankind, we always have a really good way of messing things up. But I'm an optimistic.
I am too. I'm absolutely an optimist too. And I love what you said about, I mean, yeah, it sounds like you're speaking a little bit in the direction of like a UBI kind of question, right? A universal basic income. Like if the technologies can take care of a lot of the repetitive transactional work, then, and move us as humans up the work hierarchy toward more creative work, then does that mean that we can have some of our bases covered? If the technologies are able to create those things en masse. I optimistically, and in terms of the vision I would cast for the future, I absolutely hope so. In terms of the complexity of getting from here to there, that's another story, because there's a lot of profit that stands between here and there. There's a lot of partnership across public and private sector that would be required to get to that point. A lot more trust that would need to exist than I think currently does across all parties. And so I'm hopeful that we can get there too. And I think probably it would take, I'd be curious your thoughts, like maybe it starts with a specific leader in a certain space that says, okay, for instance, right now with shareholders, we have this, all ever increasing, profit and shareholder value as one of our chief, for any publicly traded company, one of the chief aims, right? And so imagine, I actually think I wrote this example in the book. If you came up with a way to manufacture, let's say, some kind of food that you manufacture 10 times more efficiently, you're going to make the same profit. So you'll make the same net profit, but you can reduce the cost by several orders of, by not orders of magnitude, but by, let's say it's a fraction of the price. How would shareholders react to that? So you're doing something amazing in the market where now people can have access to this food that you're creating.
Why are we dumping this on enterprises? What I would say is, let the enterprise do the profit, and me as the government, I'm gonna tax that profit, and I'm gonna manage it so that the people who are really in the need for food, they get it, and they are being taken care of. And the companies are focused on actually producing profit, maximizing profit, being very competitive. Like, in a sense, Microsoft, you're talking about Microsoft. Bill Gates, his ability to create money and to develop an enterprise that generated a lot of value is the true spirit of capitalism. But it's not necessarily his job to take that money and to redistribute it. Now, he made it now his job to actually, okay, I created this wealth and I'm going to use this wealth to do something in a different way for the society. But that's also the government's role, the society's role, the other organism that should use that whatever an enterprise is creating, whatever value the enterprise is creating, then redistribute it in a way or another towards us living better in principle.
I like that. I think that I agree that we, it's hard to say who, it's almost a question of who should that leader be. So I'm not saying that organizations, because we can't require, like you said, you can't require an enterprise to do something like that, right? That's not why they exist. At the same time, at the onset of the way that governments have been formed, it's not the government's job to feed individual people. It's their job to keep them safe. It's their job to, right? There's a lot of other jobs the government has, but it's not necessarily the government's job to feed people, just like it's not the enterprise job to feed people. So I think that our needs have evolved as society. And now there's this gray space where it's like, okay, whose job is it to step in? And so for me, I think because of my focus and interaction with enterprise leaders, I think that that's probably naturally, okay, hey, you have the power to rival governments, right? I mean, the budget of a lot of these large, multinational companies is enough to make a significant impact in the shape of society. So that's probably why I tend to focus on what ways that they might be able to reimagine society and the value that they're putting out in the communities that they serve, more so than saying, here's how we can legislate, because that's just not as much my area of expertise as on the enterprise side.
It's funny, you're almost describing the Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other like, who does this? Who's feeding the people? Are you feeding the people or not? And, on that subject, Brian, let's wrap things up by talking about, and this sort of like leads into it, but just so folks are more aware of it, the profitable good company. I mean, it kind of touched upon what you already were discussing, but for folks not familiar with your organization, tell us what you're doing there. And I guess that's pretty much the next part of your life. You've worked with some great companies like Accenture and Microsoft, but now the profitable good is going to take care of you on the back nine of life here. But tell us about it.
I don't know if I'm at the back nine yet. I don't know how we measure which part we're at. But yes, I do. I started the Profitable Good Company because I felt I had been working with, like we talked about, Jerry, enterprise leaders, like, for instance, at a large chocolate company, multinational chocolate company, that were trying to solve the question of how do we guarantee that there's no child labor in our supply chain, for example. And the things we came up with ultimately ended up running through a test of, and this is, with a good amount of discussion, but would need to run naturally through a test of, okay, does this work from a profitability? We answer to shareholders. Does this work from a profitability perspective? And so to me, I felt like there was this interesting space where I was seeing more and more. Well, I was having these meetings with leaders from all over the world, Fortune 500 company leaders, C-level executives, where we'd have mutual C-level executive buy-in to go do something that would be a meaningful impact to the world. And we kept struggling to get to, even with that level of buy-in and with a great deal of strategy and flying back and forth to each other's headquarters, we're really struggling to figure out how to make it fit within the sort of systemic context of both of our organizations and the market. And so that became a point of focus for me to say, well, I want to go try to figure that out. And some of what I came up with was that profitable, and the reason I coined sort of profitable good as a term, is that on the other side, outside of enterprises, you go to the broader market, and profit has been conflated with greed. People see profit as, you see them used interchangeably. And I kept sort of running into this question of, I'm hearing about all these greedy corporate leaders, and then I'm looking at all these people that are mutually trying to solve, global problems together. We're trying to figure out how to use profit to make that happen and to be able to stay in business so we can keep producing valuable products that people rely on. And I was wondering, where are those I know they're there. I know there's greedy people out there that are looking to exploit wherever they can to try to make more money. But I felt like there was more nuance to it. So what I created was a scale where on the one side you have greed, which is money at any costs. I'm willing to sacrifice anything for money. That's greed. The other side you have altruism, which is good at any cost, which is I'm willing to give all my money away or use the money that other people have given me to do good. And on that side of things, right, we have 98% of the federal budget of the United States is made by for-profit companies, is tax from for-profit companies. So if every company in the world switched to altruism and started doing good at any cost, a week maybe we'd last, maybe two, before systemic collapse. So it's like, okay, what there has to be something in the middle. So in the middle is neutral, which is I make profit, and I think most corporate leaders today are here, which is I'm trying to make an honest living. So I do good if I could, but at the end of the day, I do answer for some degree of profit, and therefore I'm going to do my best to honor that. And when I have opportunities to do good, either personally or with any extra funds I have to give to nonprofits, I'm going to do that. And then I think there's this interesting space between neutral and altruism, which is profitable good. And an example of that, coming back to the chocolate example, if you're a chocolate company and you come out, and there's not data to prove what the economic impact would be, which is part of why we weren't able to move forward at the time. But if you were able to come out and say, no, we can guarantee, like we partnered with the UN, we've done a lot of work, here's some transparency into what we did. We can absolutely 100% guarantee that these 20 chocolate bars, as you go into Halloween season, are 100%, there's absolutely no child labor in these chocolate bars. I think the profit, from a profitability perspective, the economic impact would be enormous. And so in terms of profitable good as a focus area, it could be in the same way it could be, okay, we want to guarantee there's no workplace safety incidents in our manufacturing plant. So it doesn't just have to be ESG focused. It could be anywhere around the organization where you want to somehow better the human experience, internally or externally, and finding ways to do that profitably so that you can stay in business.
Sounds like Jerry's kind of company, right, Jerry? That's profitable good. That's right up your alley.
I like the way it sounds. Yeah.
Awesome. He is Brian Evergreen, the author of Autonomous Transformation, Creating a More Human Future in the Era of Artificial Intelligence, and the founder of the Profitable Good Company. Brian, thanks so much for the time. I really wish you the best.
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Brian.
This has been The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard Szatvanyi. To participate in the conversation, go to gerardzatvanyi.com. The Great Digital Transformation is a production of Forbes Books.